Tantra. And when we have already talked about this category of enjoyment, bhakta, we have every right to go to Tantra. But at once I want to say that, of course, I will not tell you about the ritual 5M in Tantra. This is all known, written, and not more interesting to anyone. Yes, the question is, were the sexual practices in Tantra? Yes, there were sexual practices in Tantra. But I will tell you about something else. First of all, I probably will connote the Vijnana Bhairava-tantra. This is the text of the 6th and 8th centuries, which essentially speaking is a kind of encyclopedia of all sorts of meditative practices. It must be said that even now a significant proportion of meditative practices that are used by anyone else, anyway, are rooted in this very Vijnana Bhairava-tantra. And here are some of the practices of the Vijnana Bhairava-tantra. Yes, what is the general context of the Vijnana Bhairava-tantra? Like most tantras, it is built on the dialogue between Shiva and Shakti. Shakti, Parvati asks questions and Shiva answers these questions. And, essentially speaking, the first question is the question of identity, again, of Shiva and Shakti. This is a question that is constantly being raised in Tantra. But the question is, what does this identity mean? The fact is that in Tantra, the experience of Shiva is the experience of that inner observer, and the experience of Shakti is the experience of desires, experiences, etc. And the idea of the identity of Shiva and Shakti, in fact, is the idea of the identity of the inner observer and the inner actor of man. In one of the texts, there is a mention that the inner essence of man, Atman, has 3 functions: jnana, kriya, and ichha. Jnana is a knowing, an inner observer. Kriya, acting, just an eternal actor. And ichha, the desiring, the willing. This is what we call the true desires. But how to come to this sense of identity? Here are all sorts of techniques. And the techniques of the Vijnana Bhairava-tantra are in many ways the techniques of the most profound, total experience of certain states. For example, one of the techniques, in the process of sex, you should lower the consciousness, sita, filled with enjoyment between the female and male genital organs. Thanks to the enjoyment of love, the word smara, one of the names of kama, was being used. An exceptional fullness of energies is achieved. In fact, we enjoy experiencing where it is so acute, and because of this we understand something. Or, for example, date with a woman, joint excitement, penetration. Here, too, such a game, sangama, seems to be a decent, and samkstuba, subta is shaking, and samkstuba is a joint shaking. Such a beautiful image. Penetrating her, sakyave sava sanikam. It is all pleasure from the essence of Brahman, and there is a higher enjoyment. In essence, the contextual, peak experiences that a person experiences during a meeting are equated with a kind of mystical experience. Memories of enjoyment from kisses, sex, hugs, even in the absence of a woman, a stream of enjoyment arises when you reach a strong joy. These techniques connote not only for sex. For example, when you reach a strong joy from meeting loved ones after a long separation, knowing this happiness, dissolve your mind in it. Purely anahata experience. Stay in the enjoyment of the taste of food and drink. The retention of this state gives the highest enjoyment. In a yogi who has achieved unity with the pleasure of singing and other acts, thanks to this fullness, a perception of selfhood arises, i.e. consciousness. As a matter of fact, you see, many practices of the Vijnana Bhairava-tantra are practices of total, maximally full, deeply dissolved enjoyment. Why is that? Maybe because the Vijnana Bhairava-tantra formulated some basic idea that summarized all these techniques. Wherever the mind is satisfied, there it should be kept. This is the essence of the highest bliss. Essentially speaking, if something brings some satisfaction, focus on it, dissolve in it, experience this. Question, why? And in fact, the question why was answered by an outstanding Indian thinker, logician, philosopher, esthete, and one of the founders of Indian aesthetics, systematizer, and mystic, Abhinavagupta. He lived about 1,000 years ago. Of course, here, but you can see, is not an original image, but a certain fantasy of modern artists about him. But nonetheless, Abhinavagupta wrote a colossal amount of texts, a colossal number of treatises, of which the greatest, of course, is the Tantraloka, to throw light on Tantra. Such an enormous text. And he summed up almost all the mystical, spiritual, religious, and psychotechnical ways that were available to him at that time, systematized them, gave his analysis, sometimes very ironic, and I may say sarcastic, and essentially speaking, argued some other ways. The Tantraloka is a separate topic. But in particular, one of the texts written by Abhinavagupta is a very short stotra, a religious hymn, which is called Dehastha devata chakra stotra. Stotra hymn dedicated to chakra, circle, devata goddesses, Dehastha, located in the body. In fact, this is not a religious hymn more precisely. At the exoteric level, it is a certain philosophical text that describes the following. In fact, what it describes for clarity are presented by this picture. To be honest, this picture and the corresponding flower here belong to the Tibetan Tantrism. It is not entirely Indian, but since it's about the same thing, I allowed myself to place it here. So what does he write in this Dehastha Devata Chakra Stotra? He draws some lotus inside which Bhairava resides. Bhairava, in this case, personifies the deep consciousness of a man. And on the 8 petals of this flower, each in its side, sits 8 goddesses, each of which performs the puja to this very Shiva. If you read this stotra inattentively, yes, one goddess donates flowers to him, another donates something else, the third something else. Well, why not a religious hymn? But if you look closely, these goddesses correspond to the senses, the 5 senses, and plus manas, that is, the lower mind, Buddha's the decision-making mind, and Bimashe, consciousness. Let's simplify like that. Each of which makes a puja to Shiva by her own object of perception. The goddess of sight makes the puja by visual images, the goddess of hearing by perceptible rumors, etc. Even the goddess, who symbolizes the human ahamkara, makes the puja to Shiva by the flowers of her own pride, literally so translated as abhimana. What does this mean? Yes, essentially speaking, Abhinavagupta pointed out such an ingenious thing, which consists in the fact that after all, human consciousness, when we talk about the inner being, about consciousness, about our inner experience, consciousness is fed by impressions. If we have no impressions, if we do not experience a new experience, then we simply have nothing to be conscious of. In the commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, in the chapter on sacrifice, Abhinavagupta says that the highest sacrifice that man brings to the gods is a sacrifice by his own hindsights and experiences, because the gods are what is inside of us. Bhairava is our inner consciousness. And accordingly, the impression that we live in this life is the sacrifice to Bhairava. Moreover, he even justifies this idea because the word diva, in Sanskrit, God, has also the meaning of div, to play. So the gods are those who play. What plays inside us? Our consciousness. An interesting look, isn't it? And then we understand all these texts of the Vijnana Bhairava-tantra, which were quoted above. That is true when we experience some kind of experience totally, fully, vividly. We really carry out an act of deep self-awareness. And on the contrary, by rejecting these experiences, we deprive our inner being of any sacrifices whatever. This, of course, very much broke the traditional Indian mentality, completely replacing all the modalities. Abhinavagupta is a genius to simply put everything upside down, or vice versa. Since I started talking about the concept of the game, then I need to say that the concept of the game, like also such sensory experiential act, also permeated all aspects of Indian techniques, psycho practices, and spiritual teachings for the same period. In this case, there are three words, or three roots, which in Sanskrit express the category of love. These are crid, lil, and div. And here is the image of a man's experience in the world, like games, leelas, or creeds, divas, devas, etc. It filled, for example, the same Krishna lyric poetry, because Krishna's relationship with her shepherd girls, gopis, was perceived as a game. And what is the essence of the game? The essence of the game in the game itself. And what is the essence of life? The essence of life in life itself. Later, maybe not later, and even a little bit earlier, a category like Vilasa also appeared in Kashmir Shaivism. The world exists because the world is just plain. The essence of the existence of the world is the experiencing by this very world of new hindsight, new experience. 700 years later, Hegel will say about the same thing, that the essence of life is self-knowledge by the spirit of itself through conscious involvement in this material world, and the sensation of reactions to this world. Well, what is the feeling of these reactions? It is a sensation of sensual experience. It is necessary to say that the category of lilas and creeds fell into the hatha-yogic texts, in particular, in such an interesting text as the Siddha Siddhanta Paddhati, speaking about the attainment of yogi in some higher peak experiences. It is said that he becomes invulnerable to gods and demons. Because what are gods and demons? In fact, there are also some archetypes. Like Bhairava, this being inwardly immobile, he gains everything effortlessly, playfully. Please note that the word in the top line, kridat, was used twice. He plays like a Bhairava and achieves everything playfully, as if an image or some lifestyle based on non-falling for goals, which the Bhagavad Gita already recommended, can be achieved in another way, through the attitude to everything that happens as to a game. Because the game always has a natural end. But what, in essence, is the difference, if all this delivers various experiences? Here, of course, it is impossible not to recall Socrates, who also spoke while drinking a cup of poison. Yes, this experience or this adventure has never happened in my life. You see, when this experience is brought to a certain extent, in general, it becomes interesting. And probably, I would like to complete the chapter on Tantra with such a statement from the Kirana Tantra, which in essence I quoted today: without a body, there is no liberation, because all spiritual practice is carried out through the sensation, the experience of the physical body.